Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome to Absolute Budget Tech. I'm your host Josh, and today we are re-looking at the GTX 590, the 9-year-old dual GPU solution from Nvidia, because, well, I stuffed up. Let's take a look. So, when I say I stuffed up, I really do mean it. I stuffed up by testing the 590 with a CPU that was clearly bottlenecking it, by not allowing it to reach its full potential. If you do want to see that video, I'll put it in a corner here, but yeah, that wasn't that great. However, this time I'm pairing it with the Ryzen 5 2400G rather than my terrible choice of the i5 3550. So you may be asking yourself, Josh, this is a 9-year-old GPU, how much better could it even be, given that Nvidia has dropped support for it? Well, yeah, I'd answer that by saying that it is an outdated card. But perhaps you don't fully understand just how awesome this GPU was, and well is. And for that, I am going to pass you over to the real me, not voiceover me. Alright, so now it's the real me. Okay, alright, so now it's the real me. So yeah, I wanted to go a little bit off script here and just talk a little bit about how I feel about the 590 personally. So what makes this just so cool, to be perfectly honest, is the fact that behind these two backplates here, there are two GF110 GPUs based on the Fermi architecture, and while that in that of itself doesn't sound too great, what makes this so interesting is that around about here on the PCB there is an Nvidia SLI chipset, not to mention a SLI bridge. So what this means is that anyone can run SLI on their motherboards, even if they haven't got one that's officially supported. Alright, so yeah, so what makes this just so awesome is that not only is it a dual GPU solution, so there's two GPUs here and an SLI finger here, so that you could, if you wanted to, you could run two of these in SLI. So you have two on this one, two on the next one, making for quad SLI, or easy quad SLI, because otherwise for quad SLI you would need a really big E80X board, beefy, well, a real beefy power supply. So that's what partly made this so cool. The other thing that made this so cool is that because the SLI chipset was on board here, you didn't need to use an SLI capable motherboard, because it didn't matter whether it had the Nvidia chipset on it, it's got it right here. So that opened up high-end SLI options to people who did not have high-end motherboards. Now, while in theory that sounds great, the price that this came in made it unfeasible for anyone to really use it. Like if you could afford this, you could afford a high-end SLI motherboard. And people found that two GTX 580s in SLI performed better than this, because this does have to actually downclock itself to keep it thermally under control. So despite that, I still find this just super amazing. Like, is it relevant? Not really. But, like, I mean, is it relevant for use in 2020? No. No. There's no ifs or buts, it's just no. This is super cool, but it's also outdated. It is a relic of a bygone era of slapping multiple GPUs onto one PCB. It doesn't change the fact that this is almost like a legend. One of Nvidia's first dual GPU graphics cards. Right, back to the voiceover. So you got a good look at my quarantine hair and my quarantine beard. Yeah, I'm probably going to keep that until I get the heck out of here. Alright, so yeah. So as you would have heard from me, really? Me? As you would have heard from me, this runs in SLI mode, despite not needing an SLI compatible motherboard. I mean, if you are a frequent viewer of this channel, you would know that I currently run an ASRock B450M Pro 4F, which is only a Crossfire compatible motherboard, which is AMD's multi-GPU solution. Well, how does it do this? Well, it has, the GTX 590 has an integrated SLI bridge and SLI chipset on board. That's right, on the board itself. That's just crazy. I mean, if you look up reviews of this card back in 2011, you will hear whinging and whining about how the card isn't worth it. Well, and to a certain extent, they are right. But it's a lot more interesting than that. We'll talk about that after the benchmarks. So the benchmarking suite today contains the recently reviewed Ryzen 5 2400G, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 3200 MHz, and, well, of course, the ASRock B450 Pro 4F, M Pro 4F. Keep forgetting the M. As well as using the latest Nvidia driver for the 590 that was released in 2018. Oh, that's quite a while ago. And we aren't looking at any GPU productivity benchmarks, as quite frankly, nearly any gaming GPU made in the last few years by either AMD or Nvidia will outperform this, so just gonna skip that. First up, Fortnite at 1080p with the competitive settings, which is epic view distance and low everything else. Actually saw us not really using the 590 to its full potential. Well, due to the fact that SLI is not supported in Fortnite, which is a shame, but not very surprising. Despite that, the 590 was perfectly capable of pushing out playable frame rates with averages of 95.5 and 1% lows of 47.4. Not a bad showing. Alright, so on to Far Cry 3. This title was not chosen on a whim. I actually tested this in the last 590 review, so I thought I might test it here again when we're not being CPU bottlenecked. So as I was just saying, Far Cry 3 does support SLI, so we can gauge what type of dual GPU utilization that we're actually seeing here. Alright, so I let the game choose the most optimal settings for us, which defaulted us at the ultra high preset. Far Cry 3 was actually scaling quite well with both GPUs around the 70 to 90% usage. Thanks to that, we actually got a real nice average of 89.1 with 1% lows of 45.5. While the visuals were pretty fantastic, there was a very noticeable problem, micro stutter, which explains the low 1% and 0.1% figures. A problem that we will see a lot today. So if you watched my last video, you would know that Rocket League is very sensitive to CPU frequency and IPC, but it can run on nearly a potato GPU. So despite the scaling on the 590's part being not too bad, the FPS is virtually identical to the last video, with averages of 188.3 FPS and 1% lows of 117.5. This was tested on the high quality preset and FXAA turned on. First, I want to say that GTA 5 has great dual GPU utilization and SLI support. GTA 5 gave us a very nice average of 88 and decent 1% lows of 50 using the normal preset. However, the 0.1% low just truly shows how bad microstutter can really be. Nevertheless, the game still looks absolutely fantastic, even though it's 5 years old, and it's just still so much fun. Like, for me, it's a realistic driving simulator, and these days, more so. Alright, so Watch Dogs is another title that supports SLI and gives very respectable frame rates at the medium preset, with a showing of 67.3 and 1% lows with a showing of 67.3 average FPS and 1% lows of 36.7. I must say that while I find the story of Watch Dogs to be exhilarating and, well, quite frankly intriguing, the driving mechanics are absolutely disgusting. However, that is neither here or there. What's important is the performance of the GPU and its utilization of both GF110s, which actually wasn't too bad. For Rainbow Six Siege, we had to use the low quality preset, and with that in mind, I assumed that we would be achieving 100 plus FPS. Like, I mean, come on, dual GPUs and at a low quality preset. Yeah, I was proven to be quite wrong here. Thanks to averages of 74.4, 1% lows of 47.1 and 0.1% lows of 19.9. While this title does support SLI, and the game does actually manage to use both GPUs, this isn't as great performance as I would have expected. But that's not to say that the frame rates that we saw aren't playable. They're absolutely playable, minus the microstutter. Are ya ready to set out on the grand ocean, mate? Yeah. Okay, bad voiceover aside. Up next is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Yeah, personally, I love this game, as it was one of the last in the series you could actually interact with for like the present time in the conflict against the Assassins and the Templars. Good times. Alright, enough with the nonsense. Let's get on to the performance. Okay. It's a shame that this game is actually capped at 60 FPS. And no, it's not VSync. I didn't want to pull a Kyle in Scrapyard Wars 5. Just saying. But even after digging into the config.ini file, changing the FPS limit to 144 instead of 60, the game just reset itself back to 60 again. So either way, yeah. The game does look fantastic, if not a little bit dated, but at the very high preset, it looks absolutely fine to me anyway. That being said, performance wise, we saw an average of 60 FPS. Oh, shocking, I know. With 1% lows of 47 and 0.1% lows of 38.2. The game footage you are seeing should be a perfect example of the problems that SLI faced and still does face to this day. As I have stated in previous videos, hang on, in fact I think it was actually the review of the 590 when I first did it. Yeah, it was, okay. Red Faction Guerrilla has to be one of my favourite games I've ever played, and I was really glad to see SLI support at first. It's all downhill from there, my friends. The game was a stuttery mess that quite frankly made the game completely unplayable, thanks to the average FPS of 104. Now that in of itself is fantastic, over 100 FPS on average. What wasn't so great was the percentile figures. The 1% and 0.1% lows of 10 and 2 respectively. Like, that is just ridiculous. Like, all I did was, after you join the Red Faction, you go to the first mission where you got to destroy this building, and then I just did a little bit more on the side, so blowing up some towers and whatnot, some buildings, and that was it. The performance here is just unacceptable, and driver support cannot be blamed here, as Faction Guerrilla Remastered was released while support for Fermi was still very active. It's a real shame, but despite this, the dual GPU utilization was actually pretty good. Just performance sucked. Alright, don't get too excited here. This isn't the reimagined Modern Warfare. This is the OG Modern Warfare, but remastered. So, yeah. Using the Blackout mission as a benchmark, we actually got nice results at the low preset. Although you wouldn't actually know that it was at the low preset by the way it looks. Activision really did a good job with this remaster. With averages of 90.7 and 1% lows of 39, the experience was very pleasant. And I didn't actually notice too much of microstutter, but it was present. Finally, we have Firestrike normal, so not ultra or extreme, just the normal. And we got a graphics score of 6571, which is not too shabby, but that being said, not too great either. Alright, so after seeing the performance benchmarks, we have to talk about the positives and the negatives. Starting off, this was a great way to experience high-end SLI without an SLI capable motherboard, of which most motherboards still to this day don't support SLI, barring the high-end boards such as your sort of mid-range to high-end X570, Z390 and Z370 boards, like those type of tier boards. Although, that being said, the 590 would have cost you a pretty penny with a MSRP at launch of 699 USD, which unfortunately and ultimately made it unreachable for many people. The other thing that's not great about the 590 is the heat output from both GPUs, as it regularly ran close to 80 degrees. Now I know that SLI configs and crossfire configs do tend to run warmer than when they're by themselves, but yeah, that was quite warm and it certainly did heat the room. Well, of course it heated the room. It's Fermi! But it also requires a beefy power supply of at least 650 watts, but it's recommended to have a 750 watts power supply. Like personally, I have a Corsair TX 650 power supply, which powered the 590 okay, but it was touch and go there for a while, so that's why I'm not testing with any overclocks, because it would suck that power right out of the TX 650. Alright, so I can wholeheartedly not recommend you go ahead and purchase a GTX 590 today, for a few reasons. One, driver support for Fermi is not just inactive but completely dead. It just died in 2018. And two, it's not efficient and it's very power hungry. You know, when you compare it to a entry-level car like the RX 570, which will outperform the 590 in most titles. I think in nearly every title I tested, but I'm unsure. But either way, it's a lot more efficient. 3, it can't keep up with modern titles, considering the lack of recent DirectX versions and its low CUDA core counts compared to more recent Nvidia series cards. Like, I tried to test Resident Evil 3, I tried to test Doom, for some reason Doom was playing up. I also tried to test Modern Warfare Warzone. They all wouldn't run due to a lack of recent DirectX versions, or like lack of recent DirectX support. And 4, gaming while using SLI was causing a temporal artifact called microstutter. Far out, like, what am I, in Star Trek? Oh, I wish. So yeah, while gaming in SLI, it actually caused a temporal artifact called microstutter, using both SFR, or split frame rendering, and AFR, alternate frame rendering modes. If you want me to go into the difference between split frame, if you want me to go in depth into the differences between split frame rendering and alternate frame rendering, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to take a look. To be honest, this is super cool if you love interesting technology, but it's not very practical for 2020 or for any form of use in 2020. Personally, I had so much fun with this card. I really geeked out over the 590. I had so much fun, and I think I'll always keep it around as a bit of a hint back to where the future of GPUs could have been, until we realized it wasn't a good idea. Alright, so thank you for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like, do all that YouTube stuff, and feel free to comment below if you've had any experiences with the GTX 590. I'd really love to hear about it. Hit the subscribe button if you want more tech videos coming your way, and as always, I'll catch us all in the next one.